Um, it's been a hell of a week. Not a lot of stories, but a couple of really, really big ones. So yes, things to talk about tonight, definitely. And let me pause the playback stream over there. Good to see, especially on short notice with the posting the stream. Although for those of you who want to know, of course, this is the same time every week, 10:40 p.m. Sundays. Just a little bit easier than 10:30, just with the nighttime routine. Plus, I was always sort of late when I did it that way, so this works out pretty well. Good to see you, Phoenix787, and Tomei Samurai, and Eddie Jordan Peterson as well. Good to see you all in the comments. Quint Ranked, great to see you. And boom, we have Quint Ranked, James Kelly. Who else? Say hi if you're in the comments. Always nice to see people there. First comment ever by Tewa Iwai. Good to see you, Tewa Iwai. And yeah, shout out, by the way, to JP Rugby. Now I'm trying to remember the Twitter handle, but that's right. Who I met for the first time last week at the New Zealand Namibia game. That was pretty cool. Rugby for all, JP. Yes, great to see everybody here. Everybody okay over here? Well, that'll be one of the topics we're talking about. Hagibis tonight, of course. We've just come off watching the rugby, which I have to talk about. And I won't just talk about like the game. I will be talking. That's what I thought. So good to see you, and thanks for saying hi. Hey, JVlog07, good to see you. Salutations. Now that I know what that 07 thing means. So yes, a few things to talk about. I'll talk a little bit about the game because it was just magical and awesome and amazing. But I will also talk about some other things around the game that I thought were just interesting, just comments and stuff that I saw. Of course, Hagibis was a big deal. The sort of what actually went on, that typhoon number 19 from this year. Mr. Cordy Chip, Scotland getting wrecked by the typhoon made you laugh a bit. Soppy, nice to meet you, Soppy, and I think that's the first time I recognised that handle name. So welcome, good to have. I think a new commenter anyway. Good to see you, and yeah, good to have you all in. So yeah, a few topics, a few news stories, sort of about Japan and whatnot. Yeah, good to see you all. Remember, as always, Sergeant Bilko, I see is in there, and remember, do what Sergeant Bilko did. Put it an @ mark, and it'll highlight in orange to me if you say my name that way. I'm always ready to jump in, take any topics or questions that you have, but if you don't, I'm just going to jump in and talk. So we can go through the week. I'm doing it in reverse order to usual, where yes, I'm going from normally I actually tweet the newer stuff first and the older stuff last, and I don't actually think that's a good way to do it. It's not intentional. I always set up the magazine in the wrong way. So today I was actually thoughtful. I put the oldest ones first. So starting with, I've got the a photo basically of can I turn that off and just show you? This is just basically from the Namibia All Blacks game, which I went to last week. I had the one game of the World Cup that I got tickets for. It was pretty good. Hey, John Anderson, good to see you indeed, and very good there with the orange highlighting at Hiko Simon. Good to see. And yes. So anyway, it was, Namibia, of course, are an amateur side. They play in the domestic competition for South Africa. It was, they were very unlikely to have a chance of causing an upset in this game, but it was a fun game, and they actually put up a pretty good fight against the All Blacks. It wasn't, it wasn't a romp. It wasn't a 100-point game. But it was a good chance to see some of my favourite All Blacks have a good run around the park. It's what the lad wanted to see. And it was a pretty good day out. But that said, there have been some great games in the World Cup so far, and the two that Japan have had with Ireland and Scotland now, of course, we'll come back and talk about more towards the end. But yes, indeed. Tomei Samurai says, Wubaluba Dub, I don't know either. Yeah, well said. I couldn't have put it better. So anyway, that was a great game. So that was. We'll come more into the rugby at the end, since that's the last thing that we have here. But yeah, a bit of a thing for travelling around Tokyo. JSM wasn't close in the end. They needed to score 3 more times to get through. Great to watch though. Yeah, JSM, with the rugby, I think you're talking about, and I guess everyone wants to talk about it right now. Maybe I should start with this and not go through sequentially. But yes. It turns out, I looked at the comments after the game, I wasn't tracking the math and I didn't know how it worked. I did assume that if Japan lost or there was a draw and Scotland got a bonus point too, it could have made the math wonky. So I assumed that if Scotland were able to get 7 points and tie up the game at the end, that it wasn't a sure thing. So I was tense, even if that wasn't actually the case. I guess the players probably would have been presented with the math before the game, but Scotland was clearly playing to try to tie it up and pull something out at the end. So from my perspective, I thought it was a fantastic game. Actually, it was one of the best games. I mean, it was a bit like the inverse of the South Africa game from the last World Cup, where in the South Africa game, time was up, Japan was behind, and they were just keeping the ball alive. And for 10 minutes, they just hammered attacking the South African line. This was the opposite. It was they looked a little bit tired. They slowed down towards the end of the game. The Scottish were basically relentlessly attacking the Japanese line. And when Matsushima carried it back and it was a 5-meter scrum, that's when I tweeted, "Holy crap!" I just thought, because Scotland had just got a penalty from forcing the Japanese scrum into a collapse from pressure pretty much just before that. So I was like, oh, they're not going to be able to hold this out, and they did. It was just so it was the same sort of, in the same way that it was sort of a miracle win with the try in the 2015 World Cup. This was like the same thing. Except it was from defending. It was from holding out. So always good. Yeah, indeed. Tier 2 teams are always improving, and the thing is that as they all point out, if rugby is serious about becoming a true global sport, in the same way that football is. They've got to actually bring tier 2 teams more into these top tier competitions and let them get used to playing at that level. Which means not just Italy, it means Georgia, Argentina. So they've kind of pulled Italy into the northern hemisphere one, they've pulled Argentina into the southern hemisphere one, but there are countries like Georgia and Japan which aren't in those competitions, and they can be competitive. But anyway, before we get too much into that, I will go through the topics that I have, including Time Travel Tokyo, the city's best old world districts, and yes indeed, from Tokyo Cheapo. Good blog, by the way. You should subscribe to these guys. Not just cheap information, but actually pretty good information around things to do in Tokyo that are fun and easy to do. But interesting. Always good to understand with Tokyo that really nothing in Tokyo. It's very rare to find anything in Tokyo older than 1945. I mean, the entire city was pretty much burned in World War II, and what there is that predates the war is from 1923, because the whole city burned again in 1923 from a firestorm that happened from fires triggered by the 1923 Kanto earthquake. The earthquake itself caused a lot of damage, but it was fires caused in the aftermath, and just everything being made out of wood that caused that. So in terms of like Kyoto type oldness, there isn't much to find, but in terms of old places, Yanaka, this is really the old fashioned sort of this is a real true, I mean, it's kind of, I always think of Yanaka as a little bit like Asakusa, but I guess it is quite different. That is a good one. There's one neighborhood that I really like, Shibamata. I used to play rugby out that way. Katsushika, okay, so it's sort of is that is more like Asakusa in that case. Kawagoi, Saitama, that's a bit of a ways out. I might be thinking of Yanaka actually. There's actually a pretty cool place between like Nippori and like Gokokuji. There's a few places like in that sort of the whole eastern side of Tokyo. Basically, if you draw a line between like Takado Baba and Yuracho, and you just do like the whole Yamanote sign like sen side like east, most of those areas are old, and there are some really, really nice neighborhoods. I mean, neighborhoods like Iidabashi and Meijiro are like, they're shitamachi, but they're actually quite nice. And there are some actually nice old neighborhoods as well if you get up near Nippori and so on, inside the Yamanote line. And then it's all very walkable and pretty cool actually, and not all of it's like Asakusa, not all of it's sort of kitschy and touristy, so definitely worth checking out. I thought that was a good topic. The last thing you want to do is disappoint Jamie Joseph. We will come back to this. It sounds like everyone's all G'd up to talk about the rugby, as am I, so we'll get to that. But here's another idea which, launching this during the World Cup, strikes me as a terrible idea. In fact, they could go bankrupt before the end of the World Cup, based on people I know who are into rugby. But yes, more and more, sort of pubs and izakaya and so on are offering these kinds of things where you pay a monthly subscription which will basically give you a nomi hodai like every time you go in. And you just pay 4,000 yen, $37 approximately for a month, and you can go into a whole bunch of different chain stores that have all agreed to team together for this. And yeah, if you think about, I mean, actually, seriously, like if you go to like a Roppongi for one night, and you're just having honestly just drinking beers on a night, I mean, 4,000 or 5,000 yen goes away like that. You're paying, if you not recent information for me, but you used to pay at the door, you'd pay 800 yen per drink or whatever, and yeah, you'd easily, so that for a month for unlimited drinks at izakayas, which will always include beer anyway, and whatever they have for the nomi hodai, for the all-you-can-drink menu. It's pretty good. I'm pretty sure my rugby club would destroy the economics of this for the places offering it pretty quickly. But yeah, I see. So this is a promotion for these chains. It only lasts until December 5, so you've only got 2 months. Well, again, they've done this right during the World Cup, so good luck to them with that. But something good to know, just to repeat, the promotion is being held by... so the exclusive vouchers are eligible at Hokkaido Amataro Nijumaru Sangendo Irohan it's hard to read, Romaji sometimes, and Isa Izakaya bars, which means 130 stores across Japan. Basically, you get this. But it's another thing like this with subscriptions to use vending machines at train stations. That's also happening right now, where you pay something like $10 a month. And again, if you're used to getting a bottle of water or something from the station every morning, or like as a routine, it's actually a pretty good system. For me, it's kind of funny. Japanese vending machines for drinks are awesome. They have so many different kinds of drinks. But at the same time, I have a funny thing. I can look at like 3 or 4 vending machines, and other than water, I can't. There'll be times I don't really see anything that I want to drink. There are so many kind of weird, watered-down sort of flavors that I never got used to. I mean, I like the old palm juice, the mandarin juice, and there's a few things that I sort of like, but yeah, not much. But there again, I mean, if I was just going for water, or if I could drink canned coffee, which I guess I can't, I would go for that. But there you go. Hey, Kanara, good to see you. And Jay, by the way, I think I said JZM welcome before, but if I didn't, there it is right now. So what else we got? Brave. So this is a good one, and this is kind of getting towards what I sort of want to talk about as a main topic. So when I was going onto Twitter with the hashtag for JPMB Scotland for the game, and just seeing all the random people talking about it, the old chestnut of seems a bit weird for a country that is so restrictive on non-ethnic Japanese, that they would have so many non-ethnic Japanese representing them in the rugby team. And I got slightly triggered. I took a deep breath. I actually started to write something, and then I deleted the tweet before I called the person a racist online. But sure, I'm terribly sorry that Japan doesn't meet your imaginary standards of racial purity for other races in other countries. But it's not how it is. This is kind of the point. Apart from the fact that there are more and more, mixed heritage Japanese, everywhere, the assumption that these are ring-ins, that tends to be done. I mean, setting aside the fact that most of the teams in the World Cup have not insubstantial numbers of people who are born in other countries and have come and lived in a permanent residence in the countries that they play, and they represent those countries. The rules of rugby are that you've basically you're not allowed to represent more than one country, so you have to commit to one country, and if you represent that country, you can't play for anyone else. And if you're not from that country, you have to meet residency requirements, which I think are that you have to have lived there for like 3 years and not represented any other country, which if you're a serious rugby professional, that's quite a big commitment actually to make. And so you look at the Japan team, and it's true, there are a number of faces in the team that do not look like your traditional image of Japanese. And I remember myself when I first saw, for example, Kotaro Matsushima, the wing, outstanding wing for the Japan team. To me, he actually looked like a Pacific Islander, and there are many Tongan and Samoan Pacific Islanders in the team. And a lot of the Pacific Islanders are starting to come in more and more. Was it 5 years after this year? Which again isn't a problem. I mean, Michael Leach, originally from New Zealand, he came to Japan when he was 16. He's captaining the team now, and he's a Japanese citizen. He's actually naturalized. So with the Pacific Islanders as well, it's pretty common that they'll come over. Maybe they'll be scouted in high school, and they'll come over on scholarships. But the point is, they're coming over in school age, they're going through the Japanese high school and university system and going into the clubs, and they're working. And quite often what's happened with that is some of the members of the Japan rugby team have married Japanese spouses. They've taken the Japanese surname of their spouses. They've become Japanese. A lot of them have become naturalized Japanese citizens. Coming back to Kotaro Matsushima, when I first saw him, I thought, he looks Tongan. And I didn't actually realize for a while till I looked it up one day. And actually, Te Waiwai, because I haven't looked this up before, I might be wrong about this, but my understanding is that his father is from Zimbabwean. His mother is Japanese, and he was born in South Africa but came to Japan pretty much as a baby and then lived his whole life, pretty much from nursery school all the way through. He is completely Japanese. I mean, Japanese citizen, Japanese name, Japanese mum, Japanese, he was born outside. He's like a Japanese who was born outside of Japan, who just happens to have a African father. And again, I know people's expectations, just like, you look at the Scottish team, there are no black players in that team, but of course there are plenty of Asians and black people in Scotland. It's kind of weird in a way that they don't have any minorities. And, it seemed a little bit off to me that a Scottish fan is complaining about the racial impurity of the Japanese team. But this is Japan, and what I loved most about this, and you'll see it later, but spoiler alert, I had no idea actually, but apparently Naomi Osaka was at the game, and she presented the Man of the Match award to Kenki Fukuoka, who scored 2 tries in the game. And she's a different type. She was the opposite in a way. She was a Japanese mum, but born in Japan and then grew up outside of Japan. But in terms of the expectation of someone who is completely who to another Japanese person would be, again, perhaps people are getting more and more used to the people of varying appearance being Japanese, but I don't think anyone in Japan, 99.9% of people in Japan were basically that you always got to laugh at that racist 0.1%. But most people wouldn't think would completely accept just the same as that, except Hadik Sunny or all these other sort of athletes who are born and raised in Japan. Same Kotaro Matsushima, he's Japanese, he's 100% Japanese. He is, a category that now exists, just like there are black people, there are black English people, or, there are Pacific Island, New Zealand people. There are African heritage Japanese, and not an insubstantial number actually. There's a lot of people of African heritage now who have been living and working in Japan for long enough that they're having kids. It's a great thing, and these people are, some of their kids are now starting to grow up and represent Japan, and it's awesome, and it's a great thing. And there was a survey which actually had Michael Leach, a New Zealand-born, I think he's actually himself mixed Fijian and Caucasian heritage, born in New Zealand, came to Japan in high school, lived here most of his life, longer than me, and is now a Japanese citizen. He's like one of the most recognized Japanese, famous Japanese personalities in a recent survey, second only to Shinzo Abe. He's the second most recognized Japanese person in Japan right now. He's a Kiwi and a rugby player. It's nuts. It makes me kind of happy. But when I say he's a Kiwi, he's Kiwi-born Japanese citizen. So again, it really drives me up the wall when I see, and I know that there are people who are into a certain school of belief on racial ideas who like to they have this imaginary view of Japan as this perfect world for people who believe in ethnic separation. Basically, a lot of people who believe in ideas that correspond to white supremacy or racial separation, they say, look at Japan, they don't allow, people they don't allow Muslims in, and they don't, they're strict on non-ethnic Japanese being citizens and whatnot, and look at how successful they are, and it's bullshit. And what I love is that these players in this Japan team are Japanese. They've committed their lives to Japan, and they're kicking ass. And and their kids are in school, and they've come through the school system, and they're pulling through Japanese players as well. Again, you look at who scored the tries, and you look at today they were mostly Japanese. And the other thing that I loved is that when you have these racist people being disappointed at Japan not meeting their racial expectations, which in itself is extremely problematic, you also have this other thing as well. There are Japanese in the team, or people that you won't even realize are not Japanese. Ku, the winger, the now tight head or loose head, I believe that one is the tight head. I'm going to get this wrong. I don't know my prop positions very well, and again, maybe Tiwaiwe might be able to help me with this. But the number one, anyway, he's Korean. Korean citizen who's natural. He played in Japan long enough to represent Japan. And that's awesome. I mean, Korea's like a tier 3 country. They're sort of coming up and trying to make it in the tier 2 in rugby. But again, they've got a lot of high schools in Japan that play rugby. And, I've played against Korean rugby clubs, and they're tough. They've got a lot of good players. But for me, when you talk about diversity, in the Japanese team, again, just like you have in Japan, you have a lot of Korean people, you have a lot of people that you wouldn't notice unless you saw by their name that they had a different heritage. So credit to Justin McCurry of The Guardian, of course, who does actually a lot of pretty good coverage of Tokyo. And I really appreciate that he covered the story about how, for example, it's got it there, South African, born Zimbabwean father, Japanese mother. Oh, I was right. But basically how Japan, and again, the appearance in sports, no question. Sports is probably leading society. Society isn't as mixed as Japan looks by its Olympic teams or its soccer team or its rugby team. But to me, it's fantastic that that we're seeing, that the definition of Japanese. Japan. Hey, I'm glad you enjoyed the tweets. I think I recognize you from liking the tweets. To me, it's like, yes, earthquakes and rugby matches. I'll tweet just out of excitement. I'm glad that you appreciate it, and thank you for following. But anyway, and coming back and talking about the rugby, the theme that I want to talk about is that, yes, I think that to the extent that it makes it easier, not that I actually think Japan is a difficult place for someone like me to live, but I know that people from generations before me, and I know that my half Japanese friends growing up from New Zealand, they had real struggles with identity in Japan, and it's great that we have actual role models in sports highlighting to Japanese people just the same way that there are little kids in America who want to be Michael Jordan, for example, or like there are in New Zealand. I mean, geez, I wanted to be Carlos Spencer. As a rugby player, one of my favorite rugby players, or whatever. The idea that you can idolize and aspire to be someone who's from a different ethnic group. Of course, that's completely normal. But it's great now that we have these examples that Japanese kids want to be Michael Leach, and I think it's bloody awesome. I think it's wonderful. And on top of that, the Japan team kicked ass, and it's going to add to that. So that's a feel-good news story, and I'm very glad that he covered it. Hat tip to you, Justin McCurry, for that. And what else do we have here in the topics? I think we're going to get towards the Nobel Awards, where Kyodo Tsushin coverage of the Nobel Awards, I think for literature. But yes, the Nobel Award for literature went to a Gaikokujin. So just one moment when I talk about Japan becoming more progressive. Kyodo Tsushin, what the fuck, seriously. I saw this and went, yay team. we won guys. No more Murakami. I don't know. Number one is Loosehead. Well, there we go. But it's hey Tai Nakamura, good to see you, bro. So yes, like the Cubans on the American baseball teams, our Cubans are better than yours. Indeed, probably very much like that. Like the German rocket scientists after World War II, and the right stuff. Indeed, the same sort of comparison. So yes, of course, like all things that involve progression and growth and evolution, one step forward, one step back. Kyoto Tsushin, WTF. But anyway, so Hagibis, let's talk about Jukugo, Typhoon Jukugo, Typhoon number 19, Hagibis for a start. I tweeted this, and there was a lot of people that seemed to resonate with when I asked a serious question. Did you hear the word haggis every time people talked about Hagibis, or every time I read the word Hagibis, I was like, holy crap, the worst typhoon ever, Typhoon Haggis is coming. I mean, it actually even makes coherent sense when you say it like that. Someone actually sent me a link of a news story in Scotland where apparently there had been a where apparently there was some roadworks happening in the middle of the night somewhere in Scotland, and apparently the local residents were so outraged that they started throwing beans and haggis at the road crews to try to make them stop. And there was Scotland had their own typhoon Hagibis, it seems. But yes, so that was the first problem. The second problem was this was an enormous typhoon. I mean, again, you talk about in terms of climate change and the ocean temperatures getting hotter, it just means the ocean, a warm ocean, is just fuel for these typhoons, and it's enabling them to get bigger and bigger, and for the typhoon season to get longer and longer. And again, you can tell by the number. This is typhoon number 19. Tokyo typically gets about 0 to 5 typhoons a year that directly come, really, where we're in the sort of the strong wind part of it. But this was a direct on Tokyo. It was enormous. It was like 4 times as big as Typhoon Fasai, Typhoon number 21 from last year. That did all that damage in Osaka. And the stats for it, when it was like down near the Philippines, and it was like 915 hectopascals, it was freaking everybody out. So yeah, everyone rightly prepared. It's carrying those clouds. That's rain that it's covering. That is carrying, and it was carrying a lot. So yes, indeed, everybody was kind of in awe of the size of it, and it was kind of freaking everybody out. And it did produce record rains in Hakone, in particular, a tourist spot that I was at with my dad just a few months ago. They had like 80 centimeters, 800 millimeters of rain in like less than 48 hours, which apparently is a Japan record. That is just pure rain on the ground, just from rainfall, like up to your waist, pretty much for most people. And on top of that, at least in the eye, when it was at its peak, there was 50 meters per second winds. 50 meters per second, I think, corresponds to 200 kilometers per hour. Generally 50 meters is considered to be that can lift up cars and break windows and do real damage to buildings and stuff like that. And again, very rare. In Tokyo you'd get maybe 30 meters, 40 meters during typhoons. They were predicting 50, 60 meters with this. And they were talking about there were gusts of 60 meters per second. These could blow in and break windows. And this is again what happened at Fasai last year. There's actually a story over here, which this is from last year. This is what freaked everybody out. There was a 70-year-old lady living in among the people who died. Like 7 people died in this typhoon last year. One of the people who died was living on the 8th floor of a big apartment building, and what had happened was somebody on another apartment building or a nearby building had just left, hadn't tied down or brought inside their things that were out on their balcony, and they got blown up. And it actually turned it into like a missile that blew across and went through the window of another building and killed the old lady inside on the 8th floor of a huge apartment building. So if you assume that you're in a big apartment building, which I am, that this is okay, but pretty much it was because of this news story that everybody this time, and the news itself was saying, tape up your windows to protect from the windows smashing and getting shattered, which we did. But everyone was thinking about this story about this lady getting killed by basically a projectile, and we had on a nearby building, somebody's balcony had all this crap all over it. And and by the way, James Kelly, thanks for the correct I saw the same thing in Tagalog, that you're supposed to call the Hagibis means huge speed, which it seems appropriate, but at the same time, given that it's kind of nasty and you should be afraid of it and try to avoid it if possible, haggis, yes, I mean it kind of works both ways, I suppose. But yeah, so this thing kind of freaked everybody out in Tokyo. And when the news was specifically saying, lock down everything on your balconies, tidy up, tape up your windows, and I did that for the first time in 21 years. High-speed haggis, good way, well put, Sergeant Bilko. So yeah, that was a thing that happened, and so we're waiting for this thing to come along, and it was pretty intense. There was a period between it was around 9 p.m. I was thinking it was going to go all night. Where the winds got kind of hairy, but it was just when the main center of the storm was really starting to come close to Tokyo, around 6 p.m. I believe that this happened. There we go, 6:22. The building started to really shake, and I was kind of like, the first thing was like, is that a quake? No, that couldn't be a quake. But is that the wind? No, I mean the wind could not be shaking the building like a Shindo 3 earthquake. A Shindo 3 earthquake is a not quite yet scary, but Shindo 4 is a scary quake. And this happened right when the typhoon, the eye of the typhoon, was coming like directly over Tokyo Bay. We had the magnitude 5.7 earthquake happen. And everybody tweeted the same thing at the same time, which was that a quake? What the fuck, Tokyo? And pretty much everyone reacted the same way. It was kind of ridiculous. Terrible time. I mean, there's never a good time to have an earthquake, but there are certainly bad times to have earthquakes. And Yes, indeed. That was thank you, Phoenix 787. I was making landfall in Izu, but the Bofuiki, the violent winds parameter was starting to encompass Tokyo when this earthquake happened. And yeah, that was kind of like people started joking, are we going to have like volcanoes? Are we going to have like, Godzillas coming out of Tokyo Bay? Because seriously, there's not much left. In the morning, by the way, there were a number of people actually killed. There were a number of tornadoes out in Chiba. And don't forget the F scale for tornadoes is the Japanese. It's the Fujita scale. It was invented in Japan. Japan's great at making scales for everything. So it's like Japan has the Shindo scale for measuring how much earthquakes shake, and Japan is the only country which uses a scale. Other countries use the Mercalli scale for measuring shaking of quakes, but no one really understands it or uses it. So it's really only Japan that actually uses a system for measuring how much earthquakes shake, which you can see the 3s and the 4s, so you can tell where it shook the most. As I tell people endlessly, the magnitude scale, the Richter scale for earthquakes, does not measure shaking. It measures energy released in an earthquake, which can be indicative, but it doesn't tell you how much it shook where. It's like saying how much rain falls in a rainstorm, how many million liters fell in a rainstorm, rather than saying where the rain fell and how much. Japan is good at these things, and we had tornadoes in Ichikawashi in Chiba, which apparently in the morning, like before the storm even arrived, managed to pick up and flip over a car and kill somebody inside. And there we go, Phoenix, Mr. Weather Reporter, Storm Chaser. That was an F3. Well, there we go. I didn't know that it was an F3. But because it is what people are very particular about measuring them and confirming it correctly, they don't actually announce it as a tornado. They'll announce they'll show a video of something which will clearly, that's a freaking tornado. And they'll say, yeah, there's images taken of something that are suspected of being a tornado. And if you look at it, it's like, what else are you going to call it? So yeah, there so far, there's, I think, Phoenix gave the update earlier, I believe 30 people killed. I mean, this was a significant storm. The fear of the damage in terms of when it got to 9 p.m. I'm in a big concrete reinforced solid building that's designed to handle large typhoons like this one. So you normally don't even really, other than hear a lot of noise from the wind, you don't really notice anything. But it was actually the building that I'm in. I've been in like flimsy buildings during typhoons like in the past. And I've had pretty, like pretty much like an earthquake happening all night from the typhoons, like pretty scary stuff. This building is not like that, but this building was shaking from the wind. I mean, not as much as an earthquake, but it was shaking, and that was kind of alarming. But it only lasted for about an hour, and again the rain thing. So yeah. Was pretty bad. The main concern was that all the main rivers around Tokyo, that they might burst their banks, particularly because it coincided with a high tide. Arakawa, which was endangering Edogawa, which is where I used to live, that was one of the areas that people were talking about. If you look at any risk hazard map of Tokyo, and they sell these things at convenience stores, and if you're looking for apartments or you're looking to live in Tokyo, you probably won't have time to do this if you're just arriving in Tokyo, but if you live in Tokyo, you should buy a hazard map atlas of Tokyo, because you can buy these wonderful maps that actually demonstrate things like flood risk, earthquake risk, and fire risk. Flood risk is determined by elevation and how close you are to a river. Earthquake risk is determined by the kind of soil that it's built on. Bedrock. Areas that are built on bedrock typically don't shake as much, and there's no risk of subsidence. Sandy soils are much more dangerous for earthquakes, and this is why you'll sometimes get these shake maps, where there'll be certain neighborhoods, like for example in West Tokyo, where the shaking will be a lot less than it is, for example, in Yokohama or in central Tokyo, where the soil is actually more sandy. And then you've got these fire map risks, which are to do with the construction of buildings, for example, concrete or wood, and the proximity of buildings close to each other. And again, we talked about these old neighborhoods in the start of the video. Those old neighborhoods are characterized by lots of wooden buildings being really close to each other, and this is why Tokyo used to be such a fire trap, and why there still are neighborhoods, these old neighborhoods, if you look at a hazard map, they are, they'll be mapped out as dangerous to be in from a fire perspective. Now, I used to live in Nishikasai, which is out on the way to Disneyland, and it was one of those magical places where all of the hazards convened the same. You can also get like crime maps, and apparently I wasn't aware of this when I went there. I love Nishikasai. It was one of my favorite neighborhoods, but yes, it was apparently when I bought the hazard map when I was already living there, it was like everything coincided there. It's bad for earthquakes, it's bad for floods, it's bad for crime, and it's not great for fire risk either. So yes, it is good to get that information anyway. It's very, very relevant in Tokyo, because this is the thing. When you're in Japan, you will experience 100%. If you're here for like 10 years, you'll 100% experience a significant earthquake. You will experience significant typhoons. You will have a chance of experiencing a volcano-related issue. Hell, we had a nuclear power plant quadruple meltdown. I mean, we've had pretty much everything, except an actual Godzilla attack, and that's what, this is kind of a part of, in terms of the fallout from this. The thing about this storm was that it was so enormous, it covered such a large part of Japan. Some particularly remote areas that had flooding that don't have easy access to find out what's going on, and we're still finding how many people are missing, how many people, the numbers are quite high, and the cleanup, the power outages, people have, hundreds of thousands have had to evacuate from their houses, people have died, and from all of that, it had an impact on the rugby, of course, where there was not only, first of all, was it safe to have the rugby, which it turned out weather-wise it was, but then there's the other problem that to have a rugby match in front of 50,000 people requires a lot of police, road control, all these other sorts of things, and these people are needed right now to rescue people and to help these areas which even within Tokyo and Yokohama are actually flooded. So it was a difficult decision, probably to go ahead with doing the rugby game with Scotland. Yes, I'm glad it went ahead, but of course what everyone was talking about in the post-match interviews and the pre-match interviews is that their thoughts are really with the people who are still suffering, and there are still people in Chiba who still don't have electricity from the last typhoon a few weeks ago, in this as well. So, for those who participate in volunteer activities, I know there are some people on Twitter that I follow that do this out in Hachioji and places like that. Credit to you, and it's something that I think there's plenty of these sort of groups that do this, so you should look those up if you're interested. If you are interested in finding them, I'm actually happy. I know people who do this sorts of things, so if you want to be connected to find out how to join in these volunteer groups that help with disaster recovery and whatnot, I'd be happy to help connect you. So it still is an ongoing thing. This still happened just yesterday. And of course, the other thing was, with the warnings coming with the storm and people realizing that this could be an unprecedentedly large typhoon, there were a number of warnings, and I tried to give my own, which included that there were warnings that the trains were all going to be stopped in Tokyo, that they might just have shuttle services or minimum services on the subways. But even those, they were planning to shut them all down. And so I was tweeting myself that, if you are out and about, like, midday yesterday, like a few hours before the typhoon, you're an idiot. Like, if you're planning to go out Saturday night, you're an idiot. Don't do it. But yes. I see something about spreading the word about believe in yourself. Thank you for this. Taking me to over 100,000. No, I wouldn't want if we had 100,000, I'd have 70,000 people that would be just constantly disappointed every week by what they see. So yes. But in any case, give me a moment. I have to quickly blow my nose. I'm a bit stuffed up at the moment for some reason. Give me a sec. I realised it looks like I probably just snorted cocaine over there or something. I totally didn't. I was totally blowing my nose. But yes, a little bit dusty or something. But in any case, yes. So there were definitely people like not sure that, like whether they could travel and whatnot. And this is, still the bullet train services, the airplane. Over 1,000 flights were cancelled yesterday. Quick Rankin, do I have a copy of the Tokyo Disaster Preparedness Manual? You know what, I remember getting something like that like a year ago. I remember it was like that thick. And I've probably got it somewhere, but I didn't have it this time. But there's so much information that goes around the internet with these things. I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm perfectly prepared, but it's a good thing to have in the house anyway. Including the guides that are there for people who it has sections of information for people in different languages as well. So yeah. Another bit of news is talking about the citizenship thing. So Naomi Osaka will move on. This is she has decided to choose that she wants to represent Japan at the Tokyo Olympics for tennis, which makes sense in the sense that on the pro circuit she represents Japan, and obviously her living as a professional athlete really comes from her affiliation with Japanese sponsors and Japanese tennis, even though she didn't come up through the Japanese tennis system. And I've had some people even in the Japan sort of community say, oh, she doesn't even speak proper Japanese, she shouldn't be representing Japan. Which again is a little bit dickish. I mean, there's all sorts of different ways. She is actually more Japanese than a lot of the people who are criticizing her for not being Japanese enough. She's born here, she's got a Japanese mum, she is Japanese. I mean, just because she grew up in America. But the point is, she's a really interesting three combination, right? She's got a Haitian father, Japanese mother, and she's grown up in America. And she probably could have rightfully chosen any of those, and I think it's actually, as much as I think we're very lucky to have her representing Japan, as someone who generally supports Japan stuff. At the same time, I think it's really wonderful that for a country like Haiti that just seems to get the arse end of every problem. It's really great for them, and I love that she's a role model for kids there. Can inspire kids from there as well. But what America doesn't need another immigrant representing it in professional sports. I think it's actually really great for Japan to have someone like her again as a role model. So. But really interesting. It's when she said she's decided to focus. It's not clear if she's decided to renounce her U.S. citizenship. She has joint citizenship, I believe. Technically, you're supposed to renounce all non-Japanese citizenships if you are over 20 years old, but it's not actively enforced. And I don't think it should be, right? It's sort of like people only get in trouble when they become like head of a political party or something, and then they find out that they didn't properly renounce. But yeah. One thing I want to talk about, there was a controversial tweet. I thought it was a joke at first, but it turns out it was real. Someone at the weather agency thought it would be a great idea to send a tweet all in hiragana, and it kind of there wasn't so much commentary in Japanese. I think Japanese people kind of got it. To have it all in hiragana kind of makes sense for having, for example, for kids, and it kind of makes sense as well for people who are learning Japanese. But a lot of foreigners immediately sort of started saying, oh, it looks ridiculous, you can't, when it's all hiragana it's harder to read than if they just use kanji, and they're treating us like we're idiots. But the truth is that NHK only shares information in English and in Japanese, and yet most of the foreign residents in Japan are not native English speakers. They're actually Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, Iranian. And so the presumption, again, that we have, that you should either read the NHK World News English information, or that you should be good enough at Japanese from living here, it's kind of ignoring that actually most foreigners in Japan don't speak English, which is the only other thing that they have. There's a sub-channel on TV. And again, this is from the perspective that although there's a very small community of people who are native Japanese speakers, native English speakers like myself in Tokyo, it is kind of a lingua franca, right? If you want to try to, put something out in one language that will be generally understood by like 100 different people from 100 different countries, English is the choice, and that's why they use it. But there again, really, if they really wanted to put out proper information, well, they could put it out in Vietnamese and Myanmarese and Bahasa and Chinese and so on, and Korean. Or they thought, well, given the increasing number of foreign residents in Japan, you at least have basic familiarity with Japanese. Put it in hiragana. To me, this makes sense. It actually is a completely reasonable thing to do. Another way that I really like, which would have actually been kind of cool, is if they could have used furigana, like buri, on top of the kanji, just like manga, for example, to make it easier to read. Can be a little bit educational that way, but look, credit to NHK. They use spacing in between the Japanese words, so it is easy to pick out. And it's incredibly arrogant for English speakers to assume that this is making fun of them. This isn't aimed at English speakers. We have information in English because NHK puts out information in English. This is for everybody else who can't read English and is newly arrived in Japan. So I actually think it's a good thing, even though a lot of people decided to become outraged and criticize it. I think it's based. Honestly, there was pretty much a lot of passive-aggressive bragging by people that, this is ridiculous, everyone should just learn kanji. Well, sure, but stop being a dick, then this isn't for you. Is my interpretation of the situation. I think this is actually a step in the good direction, a step in the right direction for NHK, even though this person says texts written in hiragana are awful, even if you have a high school level too, because of all the homonyms. Some Japanese people think it's helpful, but it's actually 10 times worse. No, that's just showing off that you know a lot about Japanese and you just want to find something to criticize. And again, this isn't aimed at you because you speak English. So yeah, I do agree, however, that putting furigana above kanji would be the best way. I would love that. That'd be great. But otherwise, yeah. So lots of people decided to be outraged about this, but I thought that they were kind of wrong. One thing, it was kind of freaky to see like Shinjuku Eki, like the Shinjuku station at like 5 p.m., 6 p.m. last night, empty, like no trains running, everything closed, like the busiest train station in Japan. It seems like some people took the opportunity. I don't know if this will show up. Let's see if it does. Yeah, just to show really big, popular. Oh, that won't show up properly if I do it that way. Just to show popular neighborhoods, basically, with no people. Oh. Now, have I lost that? What's happened here? Hang on a sec. Oh no, I've lost my technical issues. I haven't had an issue like this for a while. Okay. You know what? I could reboot this whole setup and I could probably get it working again, but turns out that was a mistake playing that video. But instead of that, I'm just going to talk for the final bit and not risk destroying the setup. So call support, that's right. I'm kind of tempted to try to figure this out. You know what? I think that screen disconnected. I bet you I can fix this. I bet you I can. Oh, it's working. It's working. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm going to try one thing. Stop mirroring. Now I'm going to start. No, that's not working. That's a shame. Okay, well, I've lost the stories, but that's okay. I'll just keep talking about them. Stuff happens. Back into it. So that's the thing that happened anyway. Oh, here we go. Just finding my place again. So yeah. The hero gun thing, no big deal. Possible better way to do it. Interesting to see Tokyo emptied out. Apparently, Tokyo's been named the the best large city in the world for the 4th consecutive year. Who said this? You might ask. This is Condé Nast Traveler magazine. So more tourists, I guess, are going to come. Apparently, people just raving that it was following Tokyo in the 2019 Reader's Choice Awards were Kyoto, Singapore, Vienna, and Osaka. So it looks like Japan is the place to go for tourists, according to this magazine. And Tokyo is awesome because, of course, it is. We all know that it's awesome, and that's why I'm here. But yes, in terms of the other things, I wanted to show you the screen cap of Naomi Osaka giving Kenki Fukuoka the Man of the Match award, but that didn't work, so that's okay because I've lost the connection. But let's talk a little bit about the game tonight, since that's where we are. So first of all, of course, there was the big risk about the game being cancelled, and you know what? It might have been the right call to do. I mean, it could have still been dangerous to have that many people trying to travel to the game. It's a little bit inconsiderate, given that the resources that are needed to help people still the day after one of the biggest storms that Japan's ever had. But the Scottish Football Union decided in their infinite wisdom that if the game was going to be cancelled, which the New Zealand-Italy game was cancelled, the Canada-Namibia game in Kamaishi, which would have been awesome, that game was cancelled. And look, the Canadian team, when their game in Kamaishi was cancelled because of the storm, and Kamaishi was devastated in the tsunami a few years ago, big rugby town in Iwate Prefecture, and that would have been awesome. But you know what, the Canadian team, they showed class. They were already eliminated. This was going to be a festival game, but the whole town was going to come out and watch this game, but it had to be called off. The Canadian team, they stayed in Kamaishi and they helped with the recovery efforts. They actually all became volunteers for the cleanup, the Canadian rugby team. Now that's a classy way to handle a bad situation, and kudos to the Canadian rugby team. Just awesome the way that they handled that. Contrast that with the Scottish rugby team that decided that when there was a rumor that they might have to cancel the game in Yokohama because of the after effects of the typhoon, and the rules of the the tournament pretty clearly state this, that if a game needs to be cancelled, it will be cancelled. It won't be postponed or relocated. There's a reason for this. The reason is that in Japan, these stadiums, when they're not being used for rugby, they're being used for baseball, they're being used for soccer, they're being used for tiddlywinks. I mean, all sorts of things, which in Japan are as big or bigger than rugby, and it was really hard to get these venues for the World Cup. And the IRB has super strict rules about the World Cup in terms of things like advertising. Like, you've got the Ajinomoto Stadium in Western Tokyo. Ajinomoto isn't a sponsor of the Rugby World Cup. So the games that are held there are held on the condition that you have to call it the Tokyo Stadium, not the Ajinomoto Stadium, because you're not allowed to show any advertising for anyone not associated with the official sponsorship of the World Cup. It's ridiculous, and this is why when people were saying, like, the England-France game, why don't they just play it in Hokkaido, which doesn't have the typhoon? They can play it in the Sapporo Dome with a cover. Well, the reason they can't play it in the Sapporo Dome is that Nippon Ham is playing a professional baseball game there. The same reason you can't play it in Tokyo Dome. It's ridiculous that they put Shibunomiya under construction during the earthquake. But even the venues that we have were really, really difficult to get in the first place. There's no setup to be able to relocate these games anywhere. I mean, in New Zealand, sure, you could relocate them to a cow paddock or something like that, and people would play it. It would be fine. But in Japan, it's really hard to do. And these were all the rules. This is what was set up before the tournament. It was understood that if the game had to be cancelled, it would be cancelled, and it would be 0-0. So the England-France game was cancelled, the New Zealand-Italy game was cancelled, which theoretically, if Italy had played that game and had beaten New Zealand, they would have had a chance of getting through to the next round ahead of South Africa, so that would have been interesting. So that was a shame for Italy, but everyone took it in stride. The Canadians had their game cancelled against Namibia. They went and did volunteer work, but the Scottish, before the game was even cancelled, just when there was a risk of this happening, and of course for the Scots, they really believed that they were in with a chance of advancing, that they could beat Japan. And that this was going to rob them of that chance. They immediately preemptively started to threaten that they would bring in their lawyers and start suing the Rugby World Cup to force them to relocate the game or to hold the game somewhere else in the event that it had to be cancelled due to the typhoon. Now remember, this typhoon killed 30 people, and if the game was cancelled, it would have been cancelled for safety reasons, and the rules around cancellation were absolutely clear. So again, I kind of get the passion and the desperation from the Scots about wanting to find any way to be able to challenge the rules and be able to do it. But at the end of the day, what in the hell are you doing? You're attacking the host nation, and you have BBC filled up with these threads of obviously these very disgruntled, armchair critics who are saying, oh, the World Cup's been great until now, but this makes the whole thing a farce and a failure, when nothing had happened. And again, threatening legal action against Japan, against the World Cup in Japan over this, when this was completely clear and everyone else was okay with it, lacks class. So, they went in threatening legal action. I don't think that they decided to handle the game due to the threat or pressure of Scottish action. The truth is that the Japan side, this is the game that before the World Cup everybody wanted to happen. This is the game that, everyone in Japan was expecting, honestly, that Japan would not be able to beat Ireland, and that it would be a playoff for second place in the group, and that this would be the decisive game. So these were the most expensive tickets. This was the most anticipated game of the pool matches, the final game of the pool matches of the whole Rugby World Cup. And this is the game that everyone wanted to see. So, and I can tell you, I don't think anybody in Japan, even though Japan would have made it through to the next round because they beat Ireland, they would have gotten through by default if the game had been cancelled, because the game would have been called a draw and they would have qualified. Everybody felt like it's, it might be the right thing to do to cancel the game because of the typhoon, and out of consideration for the people who are still in a lot of trouble because of the typhoon. But at the end of the day, everybody wanted that game, even if not playing the game was a safe way to go through, and playing the game put Japan at risk of being eliminated. Everyone still wanted to play that game. So look, the way that a very small section of mean-spirited Scots fans were reacting, but particularly the Scottish Rugby Union was acting, was pretty disappointing. It wasn't really in the spirit that other teams have shown in the World Cup, facing the same different challenges and situation. And look at the game. In the end of the day, it came through today. They announced that they were going to play the game, and they then had to decide if they would play in front of a stadium or not. They decided to let everyone in. And goddamn, I don't know if you guys just saw what I saw a couple of hours ago. That was one of the best rugby games ever. Like, the speed that they played at was incredible. Some of the tries that Japan scored were some of the best tries I've ever seen, and that the Scots scored. And the Scots were up for it. And I tell you what, in the second half, the Japanese looked tired and slow, and the Scots, I believe that the Japanese conditioning was probably going to be better than the Scots. But no, the Scots were amazing. They were all the way to the end. Edge of my seat, I was tweeting my excitement as I was watching it. It was a really, and in the same way as when I have friends who would say, they don't understand what's interesting about rugby, and it's true, rugby can be pretty boring if you have two really conservative teams that just play kicking to one another and not doing anything. Rugby can be a pretty arduous 80 minutes to watch, and I think actually I'll accept that probably the average game of soccer is on average maybe a more beautiful game to watch than rugby. But I tell you what, when rugby is good, rugby is really hard to beat. And I would say to anybody to watch the last 10 minutes. You can find the 10 minutes of that Japan versus South Africa game from the last World Cup. You can find that anywhere online. And you don't need to understand the rules to just understand. You just watch that and you'll understand how good rugby can be. And I would tell people from now, if you get a chance to ever watch the highlights or any part of this game today, particularly that first half, you understand the game can be beautiful. It's like it's hard, it's hard to describe, but as someone who played rugby, who coached rugby, who refereed rugby, and what I love about it is, you're when you're playing it, you're facing fear. Your most basic instincts and fears about being killed or being hurt, they come out, and you've got to play basically to the limits of your psychological and physical ability. There's no, you don't get away with cheating in rugby. There's physical consequences for that. Yet, because everybody's playing in this mindset that you're more or less kind of in a kind of artificial war type situation. In the same way that you hear about soldiers on the battlefield, getting together and having reunions with the enemy years later, because they can all relate to all being in that same situation of being under this sort of stress and concentration and fear and all these other sort of things that happen during a rugby game. And it's just a wonderful thing about the sport. And when you see two teams that are going at it with everything that they have and in a positive way, like they were playing today, both teams are throwing the ball around, both teams are tackling hard, mostly legally. New Zealand referee, I'm a New Zealander myself, he was letting he could have pulled back quite a bit of foul play, particularly I would say by the Scots, but look, Japan won, and he was letting it go, and that's the New Zealand style, is to let it go, just to let the players play, and I think the Scots got the advantage of that. But that was a really great game tonight, and I tell you, I thought Japan was gonna lose it at the end. I really thought that, or maybe not lose it, but I thought that the Scots were going to pull back a draw, and I didn't realize at the time that meant that Japan would still be safe anyway. I thought that might put them in danger. So that was awesome. Yes, congrats to Japan, and now they've got to play South Africa. Repeat. So South Africa, for them, it's a grudge match, because to them that was like the coach had to apologize to the nation. He actually had to do a national apology for losing to Japan in the last World Cup. So now they get to sort of, from their point of view, I guess, make it right. From the Japan perspective, they want to prove that this wasn't a fluke, that this wasn't, that wasn't a miracle game like everyone says it was, that this is actually, Japan is now good enough to beat countries like Ireland and Scotland and South Africa. And I would say that they are, but I tell you what, South Africa's form in this tournament, they've been posting cricket scores against other teams. They've been playing like New Zealand. Actually, they've been playing really seamless, high power, high intensity rugby, and it's going to be another step up from a really intense game that we just saw tonight with Scotland. So really tough ask for the Japanese, but if Japan had drawn the game, they would have had to play New Zealand, which would be probably even tougher. I mean, probably New Zealand right now are the top ranked team. But I'd say this World Cup, even with the cancellations, even with the typhoon, which has been terrible, has still been an amazing success, actually. And I think I said this last week, but it shows really, in a way, wouldn't it be great if the Olympics could be hosted by a country rather than a city? Just in the same way that with the rugby that you get, it allows people to travel all around the country. It allows different communities to become really involved, which I think boosts the sense of ownership and excitement. And I think that the Rugby World Cup, the Soccer World Cup does this. I think the Rugby World Cup is showing again just how Japan is great. They'll fill up a stadium for any two teams playing. They'll get into it in a great spirit. I mean, for me, this is the country that I wasn't born into. I chose this country. 21 years ago, and I chose it because to me, people here acted, on the whole, I'm not saying everything's good or everything's perfect, but on the whole, people here act generally the way that I consider to be normal, or at least what I hope is normal, or what people, just the way that people, they're tidying up the stadiums, they're sort of just being considerate. There's a lot of baggage that comes with that niceness. There's a lot of obligation and a lot of hassle. But on the whole, I think Japan's at its best during events like this, and people are seeing it. And tonight's just an example of just what a great game that was made a great occasion, not just by the teams playing, but by the way the whole tournament's being run. And this is why Japan is awesome. This is why I'm here. That's all the topics I have for the show. That's exactly 1 hour. I know I haven't played music much lately, and I thought I might get to it tonight, but I guess I didn't. Sergeant Bilko wants more pole climbing for the Olympics. I don't know, any questions, any topics before I wrap up? But Tome Samurai, my rant of rugby can be applied to any sport. No question. In fact, actually, as a New Zealand fan, the Cricket World Cup final a few months ago between New Zealand and England, that was movie material. Of course, you can have any sport. I mean, hell, I've watched a curling movie. That was, you can do dramatic. It's true, you can't do that for any sport, but I do think there is something special about rugby as someone who's played it, just because it's hard to describe. But you probably get it with American football, but it's a real full-on contact sport, and I think that kind of sets it aside. And yet it's a contact sport where it's not just about being as big as possible. All the players aren't one physical one. You've got small guys, tall, skinny guys, fast guys. It's a great sport, So yes, for music, Hiko-san will play Black Pages, by the way. No, I probably won't. Believe in yourself says I've made it possible to explain to anyone what is so special about Japan. Well, no, that's just one take on one very, very small part of it. But, Japan is awesome. That's why I'm here, and that's why I guess you're here watching this, and that's why I'm doing Tokyo Tonight, because there's always something to talk about. But, I think that the Rugby World Cup really puts Japan on display at its best, and if you get a chance to see a game, I strongly encourage you to do so, because it's working out really well. If you are affected by the typhoon, by the way, please obviously take care, follow emergency information. I do really recommend, Twitter is actually, to me, it's proven itself, it's stood the test of time, from the Fukushima accident, where it really proved that compared to, honestly, international news services or Facebook or anything else, if you know the right people to follow, and I've found, I think, who the right people to follow are for good information about all sorts of kinds of things about Tokyo, and I try to retweet and whatnot information that I think is good. But in any case, it's a great place to get all sorts of information about Japan. I think, again, with the typhoon, with the earthquake in the middle of the typhoon and whatnot, it proved itself again. So yeah, please feel free to follow me on Twitter, and I'll be back, as I am every week, at 10:40 p.m. Talking about whatever's been big news this week. Go Japan! Really looking forward to the playoffs now about to start, and really huge, history making actually that Japan's gotten through. Proud as a New Zealander with a Japan connection that the New Zealand coach Jamie Joseph and the naturalised Japanese born in New Zealand, from actually a region near where I was born in New Zealand as well. Michael Leach is like this awesome figure. It's just a great time to be a rugby fan and a Kiwi in Japan right now, I guess. So yes, take care everybody. Keep cool till after school. See you next week, and have a good one. Peace. Boom. Ending the stream now. I'll figure out the technical issues next time. And thanks everyone. Remember to like if you liked, by the way. Click on that thing down there. I think it is. Yeah, not like that. Below the screen. Right. Okay, good night.